stuff and Johnson going to destroy us.
Yeah, I've been following you.
Yeah, right.
See, I'm a Navy.
I guess, but I mean, we can both make calls. You know, I'm happy to share.
Yeah, done cabin.
Also, if you would please, yeah, I mean, as many as you can. I'm not reading. I'm in here, you're physically out there.
On the Higgs boat.
Yeah. I mean, don't be shy. As many people's reactions as you grab them. It'd be great.
He got loosened up a little bit. I could ask him. Yeah, he spent a lot of time and then he ended up at one point between done with structure and Washington State. And that thing has been really going pretty fast. So, yeah, you know, when I was a kid, after the Indians got
Even as a kid, I'm like, well, then why did they come here? I hate it so much.
And probably although
you know he played in Russia a couple of years ago. Yeah, when the Legends
he's as much an artery
Fuck.
You know how they got their debut? It started as the first year first season Saturday Night Live. It was really inappropriate for all of us.
Now, of course, not having
What are they doing on this show that's totally inappropriate for them and for us? These guys on the show.
I saw a guy break his
Everyone
back.
agrees that the first one he disappears from the room. He got like a pothead joke.
He broke the back. No. No, but there was.
They were on SNL for the first season. 7 years.
I knew they were coming, but I didn't think they were going to be And there was a play or two last a couple of plays last night where Judge pick off, not pick off. Out in second, it turned out to be an off statement. He was on first and they called him. So he's going to second. I don't remember who the head of the judge apparently lost track of the wasn't thinking. But he takes that second base. He realized the ball was off. So he goes flying out. They call it out. But the replay shows that. But unfortunately,
Did he miss second?
the replay shows that he did not hit second.
Yep.
So, they do replay.
2 years.
All he said. Immediately, he seemed to be like, second base. The pitcher goes, gets on the rubber with the jab, start playing. Well, they turned it through the second.
Half of our house location.
Where do we have these screens? I guess it's that one there.
Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Some of you have missed room 110, haven't you? Been a while. I'm standing here with two gentlemen that I've spent a whole lot of time with, along with members of their respective leadership teams. As for months and months, we have been hashing out in great detail how we're going to deliver on the promise of saving the pension system. Everybody wants it to be done. Everybody knows it needs to be done. It's easy to talk about doing it. It's harder to actually come up with a document and a bill that will allow it to happen. And yet, through a tremendous amount of time and a lot of conversation with a lot of outside groups, some of whom I believe are here in the room. I'm not sure exactly which are here, but I know some of the groups that we've met with are here. We have exhaustively gone through everything we can to ensure that we do, in fact, deliver on the promise. And it's keeping the promise is really the crux of what we are doing here today. So in a moment, we're going to take you through 10 highlights of what this bill is and what it isn't. After that, we're going to, as you all leave, give you copies of the 10 highlights, and we're going to count them down here in a moment. You'll see them on the screen. We'll speak to each of them. You'll then be given a copy of a piece of paper that looks like this. It'll have 10 bullet points on it. You will also then be given, as you leave, for those of you reporters that are going to be writing on this and need to get more detail, you'll be given a document that will have bullet points specific to every single plan. So if you want to know how does this specifically affect KERS non-hazard, you can see it. What about hazard? You can see it. What about legislative? You can see it. So there's a page on each of these with more detail. Again, this is not the bill in itself. The bill has lots of other extraneous things that you will also be given soon. But the bottom line is we want you to understand what's in it first. So what we're going to ask you to do when we're done, after we've gone through the top 10, that's really the crux of it, we'll arm you with that and this, and we'll make available to those of you in the media who, on background at 1 o'clock today, want to come back to this very room and go through any questions you have with our budget director. You will have that opportunity. So get with Amanda Stamper if you would be interested in participating in that. We want to make that available to you. You will find the bulk of your questions will be answered by this document. But to ensure that we address everything you want to know, you will have an opportunity to go through it at whatever length you want to go through it with our budget director and his team. With that said, there's just a couple of things that I want to reference. First of all, and I've made a list of some of them here just so I don't forget some. I probably don't even have them all on here. The conversations that we've had with Robert Stivers in the Senate, Jeff Hoover in the House, and their teams, they have each met on occasion. I have met on multiple occasions, and as have they, and as have members of our teams, with at least the following groups: the Kentucky Association of Professional Educators, the Kentucky Education Association, the Kentucky School Board Association, Kentucky's Association of School Superintendents, Kentucky Retired Teacher Association, the Jefferson County Teachers Association, Kentucky League of Cities, the Kentucky Association of Counties, County Attorneys, Kentucky Jailers, County Judges Association, Kentucky Fraternal Order of Police, Kentucky Government Retirees. That's 12, 13 different groups that we have had extensive interaction with. I would encourage you all, and for those of you that are following along that are not in the media, to understand that I would ask you to ask them this question, but I will tell you what we have heard repeatedly, and that is that there has never been an administration that has so engaged and so listened to them on this topic, or perhaps any. We have had extensive conversation because we wanted their voices to be heard. We needed their voices to be heard. These groups represent hundreds of thousands of our fellow Kentuckians, and they affect ultimately, directly and indirectly, a whole lot more lives than that. So voices have been heard for months. Changes have been made for months. The bill you're about to hear about that's going to be unveiled here in a moment is a bill that keeps the promise. When we first began, I don't think it's telling tales out of school, we were looking to try to resolve this problem more expediently than we ultimately have come up with. We've come up with a plan that will save this over the course of the next 30 years. It takes more time, but it will allow us to deliver on the promise. So the first thing that we really want to do, and if you could just pull up the first bullet point here, this is just simply keeping the promise will save Kentucky's pension systems and meet the legal and moral obligations owed to current and retired teachers and to public servants. This is everything that has come out of the three of our mouths and others that we work with from the beginning. It goes back to when I ran for office. You go back and watch any of the debates during the course of the gubernatorial race. This phrase, this comment, came from my mouth repeatedly because it's correct. We need to do what is legally and morally right. This bill that is going to be released, that will be voted on in the days ahead, does exactly that. The second point, if you could bring it up, is that this requires a full payment of the ARC. You're going to hear terms like level dollar funding. We're not going to get into all that detail today, or at least not in this session. But I want you to understand that this creates a new funding formula that mandates hundreds of millions more into the retirement plan, making them healthier and solvent sooner. What does that mean? It means that in the past, the way the statutes were written, there were certain obligations of the House and the Senate, and despite all the rumors to the contrary, those legal obligations were met. They were. What was also in the statutes were certain language that allowed some things to may be done or may not be done. And that included things like the ARC. And so in the past, some legislative sessions and some administrations chose not to fund the ARC. It was not statutorily required. It will be going forward. And so on a going forward basis, this new language is going to mandate that we take the entire cost of obligation, we break it into tranches, and we use something, again, you'll hear it called level dollar funding, that requires us to not kick the can down the road. It requires us to fund the actual amount every single year for the next 30 years. That's how it's going to be paid for. If there's any, this provision alone should cause every legislator in both parties, Republican or Democrat alike, to vote for this bill. There's not a retiree or a person working toward retirement in Kentucky that should not be thrilled by this provision in the bill. The fact of the matter is this: we are going to deliver on the promise, and that includes funding that promise, regardless of what's happening in the environment. Those are the first two issues. The next six, the gentlemen behind me are going to take you through, and then I'll close it out with the last two. So at the end, we'll be happy to take questions, but Jeff, are you taking number 3? Great.
Thank you, Governor, and thank all of you for being here today. I want to first commend the Governor for several months ago, actually going back to his campaign, of saying we must address this issue in Kentucky. It was part of his blueprint for Kentucky. It was what he ran his campaign on, and he has been dedicated and resolved for months to come up with the plan that we're presenting to you here today. Not being critical of anyone in the past, but I think everyone in this room knows that this problem has been looming for several years, and no one has had the resolve to step up and move forward like Matt Bevin has, and I appreciate his leadership. We've had several meetings over the past several months. I think both of these gentlemen would say we didn't know if we'd get to this point today or not as a result of some of those meetings, but a lot of work, a lot of time, maybe 12 to 15 meetings. The shortest meeting I can recall was 4.5 hours, some of them lasting 7 and 8 hours. But we came into this with the Governor, with President Stivers and the Senate, with 3 goals that I think we all shared. Number 1, as the Governor said, was to meet our legal obligations, to keep the promises that we made to our teachers, our state workers, and our retirees. Secondly, to have a solution that provided a long-term foundation financially, a strong foundation in a long-term sense for a financially solvent and sustainable system. And I think as you get into this, you will see that we have done that. And the third thing was to avoid bankruptcy, because when you look at where we are and where we've been and the trajectory that we're headed on, something had to be done to keep that from happening in Kentucky. So if you would, let's look at point number 3. For those workers who are still employed, our current active state workers, as well as our teachers, there is no increase in the retirement age. I know there were a lot of rumors about that. There is no increase in the retirement age. And for every state worker and teacher, understand this, you remain in the exact system that you have today, a defined benefit plan, until you reach that 27 years or that age if you're a different tier employee. But that was important to us, to keep that promise to current workers and current teachers that you remain in the exact plan. Nothing changes for you until you reach that retirement eligibility of 27 years of service. Number 4, for those who are retired or current retirees, there is no clawback provision, and I know you all recognize that PFM recommended the clawbacks. It would generate millions of dollars, but we chose not to do that. We felt we wanted to go in a different direction. So for those retirees, and I've gotten hundreds of emails from the misinformation that's out there that you're going to claw back part of my pension, that is not happening. That is not happening at all to any pension checks. And it protects health care benefits for all retirees. You will see no change in health care benefits for retirees as well. Basically, current retirees see very little, if any, change. Number 5, for future non-hazardous employees and teachers, you will be required to enroll in a defined contribution or a 401k-like plan that will provide comparable benefits. So for new hires, you will be required, either at the state level, the teaching level, to enroll into that type of plan. Let me say this plan is long overdue, but it gives Kentuckians a strong foundation for a sustainable, solvent public pension system. We're going to do what we have to do, because failing to act will result in this public pension system in Kentucky, which is already one of the worst funded public pension systems in the country, to go bankrupt. And this is simply not an option for us. How did we get here? Frankly, years of kicking the can down the road, not casting aspersions on anyone, but as I said in my opening remarks, there's just been a lack of resolve to really address this issue at every branch of government. I commend the Kentucky State Senate, who probably 8 or 9 years ago began beating the drum and sounding the alarm about the problems with our pension system. And they have repeatedly done that year after year after year. Former President Williams and President Stivers has continued that. I commend them, but now we are in a situation where the House also recognized the problem. And one of the things that we said when we got elected in November as the new majority was, we are no longer going to step back and refuse to tackle tough issues. And make no mistake, I know a little bit more about pensions than I did 3 months ago, but I also recognize just how complex and complicated the entire issue is. This is the most difficult, the most complex, complicated issue that I know that President Stivers and myself, and we've both been here 21 years, have ever dealt with. But I'm really proud of where we are and the direction that we've headed. We've been in control in the House for 9 months, and we said we were going to take on the tough issues, and obviously we have done that. Public service means making tough choices. It means sometimes taking tough votes, coming up with innovative solutions, and I believe that's what we're doing here today with our pension proposal. The teachers who are at retirement age, let me make one thing, something that was very important to us. We have about 14,000 teachers who are currently eligible for retirement in Kentucky. We were concerned about teachers thinking they did not want to go to a DC starting July 1 of next year. And so we have made provisions and will make provisions for those teachers that are 27 years or more, they will have a 3-year window in which they can remain in the defined benefit plan that we have now. I believe that alleviates any concern. There's no rational argument for any teacher to now say, I need to retire next July, because for 3 years nothing is changing. And I think that is a very important point that we need to make, because there's been a lot of discussion about that at our school districts and across the state. In closing, let me just say again, I appreciate the governor's leadership. I appreciate the entire working group that's been meeting on this. Budget Director Chilton has done a phenomenal job of leading us in the discussion, as well as Chief of Staff Brickman and others that have been there. And I'm hopeful as we continue to get this out and talk to people, they will realize this really is a strong foundation to provide a sustainable, solvent public pension system in Kentucky, and goes in the direction that we need to go. Thank you.
I think most people know who I am. Even though I wasn't introduced, I do appreciate everyone coming out. I do. That's fine, Jeff. As the press knew the other day, he didn't like all the time y'all were spending with him, so now he's forgot me. But to that extent, I do want to say this. The Speaker is correct that in the Senate we've been talking about this, and I showed a group of people articles from 10 years ago that we started raising this flag, that the pension system had an unfunded liability, and we didn't have individuals who wanted to join us in this mission of changing the system, not until now. And in this last budget cycle, record amounts of contributions were made to the pension plan because of the direction and the leadership of Governor Bevin. I don't say this without the ability to back it up. You can go back and look at every budget in the last 20 years and compare it to the budget that we're currently operating under, and it proves my statement. To that end, we took off through the period of time that Governor started his term. He requested that we sit back and do an assessment, and that we fund the ability to have individuals look at all the systems. And as the Speaker said, it is complex because you have multiple systems, subcategories in each system, and then subcategories to the subcategories when you're trying to do this, and then individuals who go between respective subcategories to the subcategories, and then in between the respective systems. And to that extent, it took a long time. It took a lot of in-depth reading and work to understand what we needed to do to, as the governor says, and as you see on the screen, keep the promise. I stand here with the Speaker and say it is the most complex problem and the most intricate problem I've ever dealt with in 21 years. So to that extent, we also want to recognize several areas. Bullet point number 6, which I'm not sure will be brought up on the screen, we want to recognize the reality of hazardous duty employees. And to them, they will maintain the same benefits package that they currently are in. This is out of recognition of what they do. The fact that when they wake up and go on their shift, be it in the morning, the evening, or whenever, they know that they may come back injured, hurt, or potentially having an ultimate sacrifice and having lost their life. So we are not changing that part of the benefit, and it still will remain a benefit plan that it is now. Also, to that extent, there were loopholes, and many people, especially the Louisville media market, knew about the young man who got killed that didn't qualify because of a loophole. And we're going to close that loophole, that any person that is in his situation, a young officer, will qualify for death benefits if killed in the line of duty and defined as a hazardous employee.
And this will be retroactive.
And it will apply, that's true, it will apply to this young man who was the officer in Louisville. Lastly, one of the things I've heard over my 20 years is that legislators treat themselves differently, allow spiking of pensions, and a benefit level greater and more rich than anybody else. We are going to treat ourselves more harshly than any other system. We're going to reduce our benefits. We are going to be treated differently, as it would say, and I think bullet point 8, to the extent that we are not going to have the rich benefits system that we should have never had. We have complained about that for many years in the legislature, but did not have individuals who wanted to join us in this mission. And therefore, we are going to take those steps within this legislation to correct that, because it was only right to do and should have been done years ago. And so to that extent, these three areas you will see that will come through this legislation in conjunction with what the Speaker has said, and the ability to future fund the unfunded liability will make this system solvent and sustainable for all participants in the future. And to that extent, you have to appreciate the direction that the governor has helped us go in. And I want to applaud his efforts and the Speaker, because without the ability for the two chambers to work together with the governor's office, this plan could have never come together. And truly, I can't say enough about their work ethic and their desire to deal with this. And with that, I think this is a very morally sound plan, a legally defensible plan, and something that the people of Kentucky will understand and accept as the direction we need to go in future years. And again, can't say enough for all the effort that these two gentlemen behind me, as well as the other legislators and a lot of staff, have put in the time that they have devoted. One other thing I want to say about this, people will ask about, well, what have our colleagues in the other party been doing? Well, I have been briefing them, as well as the Speaker has, on progress and ideas, and encourage them to sit down at the table with us and deliver whatever they may want to deliver. That has been done with access to the PFM group, briefings on things that were going on with the work groups, and we'll continue to engage them and encourage them to participate in this system. Again, I want to thank you all for being here, and the governor and the Speaker.
Yeah, just one final statement I want to say. We could not be here today. We would have not reached this point we are today without an exceptional, and I mean exceptional, LRC staff. Brad Gross, I don't know if Brad's in here. He's probably still working. Is just outstanding with his knowledge and his background, his history on that. On our staff, Frank Willey, longtime LRC employee, who is very, very knowledgeable on the issue of pensions as well, and Colin Johnson, and the Senate staff as well. And we just had a really, really good staff working with the executive branch staff to help get us where we are, and we just want to say thank you to all of them.
Thank you. The last couple points I want to touch on are bullet points 9 and 10. Number 9, you can go ahead and put on up there. This is something we've talked about. There were a lot of rumors. The three of us did a video to this effect, and I've said it multiple other times, and yet people never fully quite believed it. But there will be no emergency clause at all. This law will not even go into effect until July 1st of 2018. That gives everybody, 9 months or however many months we have between now and then, to digest this, to look at it, to understand it, to be able to have the impact of it to the extent it has any impact on them, to be understood. And that was very important. So there is no emergency clause. This is something that will allow people plenty of time to understand. The final point is number 10. These structural changes will absolutely have an impact on our credit rating. And while that is something that's not really on the radar screen of most folks, that is huge to people in our business community. That is huge to people in our banking and lending communities. That is huge to people in our economic development community. Because we have, as a state, the Commonwealth of Kentucky has been downgraded repeatedly by different rating agencies in recent years because of this looming pension crisis. This will stop the bleeding, put forward a very definitive and clear and statutorily required solution, and it is that solution that is going to give a tremendous amount of encouragement to the credit rating agencies with respect to how they look at Kentucky. We right now are one of the worst credit-rated states in America. The fact that that will start to improve means a couple of things. Our limits on ability to borrow, if we were to need to as a state, would go up. Our cost of borrowing would go down. These are things that are good for Kentucky to the extent we would need them. And so these are the kind of things that, frankly, are going to be a ripple effect. I want to touch on a couple things, then we'll answer questions that you have about these top 10 points. This is going to be a model for this nation. And I say that definitively because this is a $4 to $5 trillion problem in America. If you use actuarially correct numbers, this is a $4 to $5 trillion problem in America. And some may beg to differ and say it's only a $2 or $3 trillion problem, or a $1 or $2 trillion problem, or the same kind of things that have been said about this state. But the reality is it is a problem bigger than anybody has the dollars to pay for unless we make similar structural changes. I do applaud these guys. We have had marathon sessions, and there were at times where I think we always believed we were going to come out of the tunnel. We just didn't know how many of us were going to be battered up in the process. But I'm proud of them. I'm honored to have worked with them. We have delivered the promise. This is the thing I want to make clear. We have delivered on the promise. A lot of questions will be asked about what about the inviolable contract. Every single thing you will see in this bill is within keeping of the contracts that have been made. It fulfills the promise that has been made. People who are on track, we had the opportunity, and you'll go into this in more detail later. But when there was a question, for example, about should we grandfather in this group, we first thought about maybe it should be just the people within 5 years of retirement. And then we thought, well, what about the person who's 5 years and 1 month? And then so what if we do 6 years? Well, then 6 years. So where do you draw it? And then we said, you know what? We're going to just simply say every single person who has come into the system with an understanding that they could go to 27 years and retire under the following circumstances is going to be given that circumstance, period. And as was noted by these gentlemen, not changing anything for someone who's already retired. They don't have the option of going back and doing a redo. So nothing is changing for retirees, nothing. They're going to get everything they're getting now. And for people that are in hazard duty, they're going to continue on in a defined benefit plan. They're going to have the option of going into a defined contribution plan. And when you see the details on this, many of you in this room yourselves are in defined contribution plans, or you have members of your family who are. And you understand that these are ones that provide a certain amount of flexibility, portability, and frankly, employer matching. When you see the generosity of the employer match that the Commonwealth of Kentucky is going to put into people's retirement plans, I would encourage you to compare it to the one you have wherever you work. You will find that it will be a very, very good plan. And so we're going to give people, both new employees and those that have been here a long time. New employees will go into it. But those that are 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years in, they're going to have the option, if they want to take the lump sum of what they've accrued thus far in their benefit plan, move it into a DC plan. And as a guy who's spent his entire life working in this world, which is why it has been a passion of mine, which is why I understood the danger of this, and which is why I'm grateful for their willingness to work as hard as we have to resolve this. As a guy who's worked in that world, I would take in a heartbeat the DC plan that we're going to be rolling out over the alternative. I really would. It's a better plan. It's a richer plan in terms of what it will do for an individual at the end of a working career. But that will be for people to decide. This is a good plan. It meets every contractual obligation. It has heard the voices of every one of those groups that we mentioned earlier. They have been heard. The wonderful thing about this plan, and with this I'll close, we'll take questions you may have, is when you have a plan that fulfills every promise, that delivers on everything that is contractually required, that addresses every single person and takes into consideration both what is legally and morally appropriate, and that even when it's done, everybody is slightly unhappy with, you know you have the right plan. And we have the right plan. If we had something that one group was completely satisfied with, then we would know that we squeezed the balloon in the wrong place. And there are many, many parts to this. The bottom line is this: it's going to come at a cost to the taxpayers for the years to come, but we are going to manage that cost. We are going to actually mandate that we meet this. This will be funded. The last thing I will say is this: there will be a question about the new actuarial changes and how that affects some of the county budgets and the school board budgets. That has not been lost on this legislature. Having two guys who've been here for 21 years each is a powerful asset to the people of Kentucky. To have a speaker who's been here for 2 decades, to have a Senate president who's been here for 2 decades, they've been to this rodeo. They are in the communities. They understand the cost of this. While we're not going to go into all the details now, we are, over the next 4 years, going to feather in the cost of implementing this plan. So this is a 33 or 4-year solution, is essentially what it is. Every single consideration has been taken into consideration, and we have come up with a morally, legally, ethically, and every other standpoint appropriate plan to make this happen. I'm honored to be standing here with these guys. I'm grateful to those of you who have covered this. I would appreciate from this point forward, as you have the facts, that we actually now stick to the facts. Before there's a plan, obviously there's a lot of rumor and allegation. Those have been dispelled. You'll have that information again. If you want to be back here at 1 today, get with Amanda, and we can make that possible so you can get all the details you want. What questions can we answer based on what we've said?
I have one for you, Governor, and then one
Sure.
process question. When will you be calling the special session?
As soon as we're ready. Again, I'm not going to, there's still a little I dotting, T crossing. Again, the guy, Brad, is not here because Brad's doing the work of the people. Here's what I'll say about a bill. When you see this bill, don't be daunted by it's kind of like the Old Testament. It's a bad analogy, but there's a lot of begets in there that nobody really understands or reads. There's a lot of that in a bill. The operative part of this bill is pretty lean. This is a simple bill because it keeps every promise that has been made. It is a very simple bill. So it will not take long for someone to read this or understand it, but you want to make sure that every single, 120-7-6 connects to 120-7-7 in some other bill somewhere. And that makes for a voluminous document. It is imperative that we have it accurate and drawn up right before we ask people to vote on it. Even though it is those details they're not likely to even look at, those are the details that matter. So it will be soon. It will be soon, but people will have ample opportunity to read it, which is critical, because I would not vote on a bill I had not read, nor would I expect any legislator to want to do the same.
Okay,
Actually, go ahead.
If you're moving all new hires into a defined contribution plan, are you concerned about how the system is going to be funded after that if you don't have new contributions coming in?
No, that's exactly what the term level dollar funding will address. And again, you'll get a better understanding of it. It is complex, but ironically, it's not that complex. It just simply says if the size of our obligation is, let's say, 90 cents. I'm going to do that because that's easily divided by 30. If you amortize that over 30 years, and you know you owe 90 cents, that you are going to pay, and that 90 cents is incorporated by the actual corpus plus interest and things or whatever the case might be. You've taken into consideration the entire cost. If that's 90 cents and you have 30 years to pay it, if you mandate you pay 3 cents every year for 30 years, you will pay it off. It doesn't matter. It literally is a moot point because of level dollar funding this term, and the fact that it will be statutorily required that this will be funded. It does not matter if there's anybody paying into the system. The reason the systems has failed is that we have not had for a long time enough people paying into the system to sustain them. Bear this in mind. Do the math on this. In Kentucky right now, there are more retirees than there are people working. That's not a healthy or functional defined benefit plan. It hasn't been for a long, long time. You can't have one person working, saving for themselves, and paying the salaries of 2 people that are retired. You just can't.
Is there a plan for the state's match, and is it planned to be high enough to be a sweet recruiting tool?
I mean, sweet recruiting tool is, it shouldn't be that so sweet that people in the private sector are having to be like, well, how come I'm losing all my people to the state? It is generous. You will see it. It is a good plan. It will allow people to save a tremendous amount of money for themselves. Some will be theirs, some will be the state's match, but it will be a very good plan. I've worked in the private sector. I've worked under plans. It's a very good plan, better than most that exist out there.
No target number?
The numbers will be forthcoming. You'll see them. You'll get them even this afternoon.
Putting teachers into a 401k account or defined contribution means they'll go into Social Security.
No.
No.
That's one thing we didn't talk about. That was very clear from the teachers. Here's what's interesting. For many years, some of you have heard, as did we, the teachers didn't get to participate in Social Security, and they couldn't participate in their spouse's Social Security, and some of them were concerned by that, and they said it wasn't therefore fair that any other change would ever come. But what's interesting is that when we really pressed that issue, we were, in hearing that, going to make changes in Kentucky to allow them to participate in Social Security. Turns out they don't really want to participate in Social Security. And we have letters from every single group. Was there any group representing teachers that did not write a letter specifically saying they didn't want to go into Social Security? So we got a letter from every one of them stating we don't want to go into Social Security. They're not going to.
So I'm sorry, teachers are going to have a 401k account but no Social Security?
That is correct.
Is that Social Security plan going to be, or I'm sorry, is that 401k plan for teachers going to be different in some way, perhaps more generous, perhaps cost a little bit more to compensate for their lack of Social Security? Is it going to be different than the others?
Again, here's what you will see, the exact details and numbers this afternoon. And the answer is there's changes, there's nuances to all these plans between hazardous, non-hazardous, teachers and non-teachers, KERS, et cetera. You will see there are some differences to all these, but it will get too far in the weeds if we try to go into all that now. The answer is there are differences, and you will see them. But they're subtle, and they're to make up for the fact that some have some things and don't have other things.
I wanted to ask one other question. It seems to me that versus the PFM report and perhaps expectation, this framework includes something that employees might appreciate in that current employees are not under this being put immediately into 401k, but they will be in their DB plans
Correct.
until 27 years.
That is correct.
That's a different.
And it's important to understand, too, even as it related to teachers, for example. Teachers inside of 5 years of service could be moved into a Tier 3 type of program had the state chosen to do that. But it's interesting because they're essentially not vested yet inside of 5 years. That's about 38% of the teachers in Kentucky. It's interesting. It's very barbelled. We have about 25% that are eligible to retire already and 38% that are actually 5 years or less of service. So it's an interesting barbell. Even for folks like that, we said, you know what, if you're in your first year of teaching, you get the full promise. You get 27 years. Again, there's nothing in here that violates anything in the inviolable contract, and that was intentional. And that PFM report was a report that shocked a lot of people. And there were things in there, including things like these suggestions you've alluded to, things like taking back COLAs, that had they been applied would have disrupted a whole lot of lives. The decision was made that we're not going to do that. We're grateful for that report. It was a good report. It was an informative report. It was something that we went through in detail and talked about all these suggestions. But many of them were dismissed pretty quickly on as things we were not going to do. So yes, I mean, we bent to the side of giving everybody even things that they frankly aren't obligated to get, just in fairness, because people came in with an expectation they're going to get what they expected.
Are the judges included in this?
Yes, and you'll see when you get this larger, there's literally for every single plan, there will be bullet points that will tell you some of the detail, and you'll have an opportunity to take this away with you and then also ask questions specific to this when you come back later today.
When you call the special session, just as the process works, will there be hearings? How many days do you anticipate for the special session to go from introducing this plan to voting and possibly passing and signing it?
I'm going to let these guys who are the experts on this tell you what the process is, but it'll be a 5-day session. I mean, there's so much work has been done. It will be so clear. It shouldn't extend beyond that. It's required to be a minimum of that. Talk about the hearing process in each of your respective chambers.
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about is obviously the governor is the only one that can call the special session, and as he said, he's not yet ready to give us a specific date. But on the House side, we plan to start having some hearings once the bill is finished, and we believe we're ready to start doing that. That may even predate the special session call, because we do think it's important. Our members are pretty adamant about that we have informational hearings and we have an opportunity for folks to come in and listen to the presentation and have some input. But so we may very well have some committee meetings prior to the special session call.
And you're talking about formal standing committee meetings rather than just caucus meetings?
No, you can't. Yeah, I'm talking about interim joint. You cannot have a standing committee because we're not in session. But it'd be an interim meeting.
Do we have it throughout the state or just here in Frankfurt? Try to travel?
We haven't really talked about that. I would assume we would have them here in Frankfurt, but it's not really been discussed. But I would assume we would have them here.
Mr. Speaker, I'll assume this is going to be a revenue bill, so it would then originate in the House?
It's not a revenue bill.
Okay. Will this change the budget?
I mean, the budget session will be done in the top of next year. And certainly the cost of fulfilling this is going to be something we're going to talk about during the budget session.
Yeah, we have to meet the ARC requirements as now mandated based on the level dollar funding once this bill passes. So it will be part of the budget from that standpoint.
Well, Governor, you've heard the numbers your budget director put out, I guess, a few weeks ago, speaking to the Public Pension Oversight Board. Would you differ from the numbers he put forward? I want to say it was $5-something billion at the time. Cumulatively, between the systems, would it be much greater, lesser, around that number still?
I would love to say I fully understand your question. I don't.
think what he was talking about was that the total contribution would be $5.2 billion over a 2-year period if we
Correct.
make no structural
Correct.
changes to the system.
Yes, in other words,
But
yeah,
these are
that's a,
structural
thank
changes.
you. Thank you for translating that for me. And in fairness, it's not your fault. It was my inability to keep up. Here's what I would say. The reason we are making structural changes is the system, as was noted by the Speaker and President both, will fail if we don't. It will fail. We are, in KERS non-hazardous in particular, is about 3 to 5 years worth at best if the markets continue to do what they're doing. That's not good. We've got to save the system. It's why we're going, to Adam's question, to level dollar funding. We're removing, it doesn't matter how many people are paying in or not now. It is now a statutory requirement of the Commonwealth of Kentucky to meet the full obligation. If you are a retiree, if you are working toward retirement and hoping to be a retiree at some point, you should be rejoicing at this bill. There has never been any retiree in any state would want to have a bill like this because it guarantees by law that your pension is going to be funded. There will be no more kicking of the can down the road, no more may nots because it said may. It is going to mandate statutorily that this be funded. Yes, it will affect what we do at budget time, but to the heart of your question, the $1.2 billion we put in last time, that as the Speaker had said, was the most we've ever put in, and it is the most that had ever been put in. But it was a tiny drop in the bucket. I heard from people at that time, well, boy, at least we fixed that problem. We didn't begin to fix the problem. This is at least a $60 billion hole. And I truly think even there we're being generous with some of the assumptions. But let's just say it is a $60 billion hole. That $60 billion hole is not going to be fixed 1.2 at a time and think that we're done. This structural change will still require the same $1.2 billion we put in the last time. We're going to have to come up with the same amount of money and likely some additional. It is possible. What we've tried to do with this structural change is not to allow it to be 2.4, or the 5 point whatever it would be divided by 2 would actually be, 2.6 or 2.7. That's literally what it would have been. It would have been everything we did the last budget session plus double. We've tried to minimize the plus double, but don't get us wrong on this. This is still going to require the same degree of funding we did last time and probably even a little more. This is a big, big cost to the people of Kentucky. To meet this obligation is a serious financially expensive obligation, and yet legally and morally it's one we are going to do. And by statutorily requiring it, there is no kicking of the can down the road. And so it will be a difficult budget session. I would be willing to bet in the 21 years that these two gentlemen have been here, this next budget session will be the toughest budget session they've ever been through. And I'm willing to bet that that is even in light of the 08-09 years when there was a downturn that was not anticipated. We are going to see a brutally difficult budget session. And yet, and we can go into this at a whole nother time, there are things that are available to us, not the least of which is a modernizing of our entire tax code and a restructuring of things on that front. That will be done at another point in time, but it's coming. If you chase two rabbits, you don't catch either one of them. We've chosen to chase this pension rabbit down. We've got a bill that will save this pension system over the next 30-plus years. And then how we're going to fund that is what happens in every 2 years in the budget process. And that's the work of the legislature.
Was it frustrating through this process for you, Governor Bevin, to know that you couldn't do it more quickly, that it is going to take 30 years? Because you had some who had thought you'd come in and it would be a much quicker process, a much more dramatic change to some aspects of the system.
Here, the frustration to me was less on that front and more, and frustration is not even the right word. I happen to be an expert in this area. Most people are not. These guys are both lawyers. You don't want me being your lawyer, but you wouldn't necessarily want them being the person that was managing your pension system. I mean, the point is each of us has different experiences we brought to this equation. So for me, the fact that this was the crisis that it was has been clear to me since long before I got into government. It's why I ran to be the governor, because I realized this system was about to fail. And despite great efforts coming out of the Senate for years, which I applauded and appreciated, and we've seen bills like Senate Bill 2 from 4 years ago trying to at least start to move us in the right direction. We've seen efforts made, but it was not enough. My frustration, what led me to run for governor, was the fact that it wasn't being addressed. That frustration was actually relieved by working with these guys and their leadership teams. Because while they weren't experts in this, and very few people in Kentucky are, they've stepped up, and as Jeff said, we've learned a lot in 3 months. Every one of us has. And this is a complicated process. But we've got a good bill. And it will take time. Sure, everyone wishes we could get it taken care of in 3 or 5 or 10 years. But the cost of doing that would be to gut everything in government and to violate, at least potentially, certain promises that were made. We're not going to do that. We're going to meet every promise that was made to everybody. We're going to remove all of that concern. We're not going to change anything for any retiree. We're not going to change people's retirement dates. We're going to allow anybody in the system to continue forward. We're going to honor the people who are hazard duty folks by recognizing that that is a different job than most of the rest of us have in government. And we are going to protect everybody at every turn. And that takes time. And so the net result of this is 30-some-odd years, and that's okay, because it's the right thing to do.
Governor, does this move CERS out of KRS?
It does not. It does not.
That will not be on the agenda.
If those that are in it and demand it, I will say this: they can't afford for it to be out. The solutions that when you see this bill, the cost of meeting the financial obligations, if we don't move, if they move out, they would not be covered by everything you're seeing in this bill. They would be on their own. They would be required next year to make funding levels based on current statutory law and certain actuarial assumptions that have been laid out and that by law they have to meet. There's none of them that can afford it. With the exception of maybe 4 or 5 counties in Kentucky, not one of these counties could afford to meet the obligation they would be required to make starting next fiscal year. Not one of them. And if they, I can't imagine anyone in light of this bill. People want it out, and understand why. If you were on a ship that was sinking and you knew it was sinking, and there's a little lifeboat next to you that at least gives you a shot, even though it's stormy, shark-infested waters, at least in that little lifeboat you think there's a chance I can get to the beach. You're going to probably get in there and take your chances rather than sit on the boat you're on that you know is going to sink. If we have in fact guaranteed, which we will over the next 30 years and by statutory funding, if we have guaranteed that this boat will not sink, why would you get off it? There's no incentive now. In fact, there's disincentive because now your odds of survival are much less in a little dinghy that you can't even afford to row. And so the bottom line is people are going to have the chance to digest this. There's no fiscally rational person that would still demand that they be allowed to leave a ship that's not sinking. If they do, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But the truth be told, for what's best for the people of Kentucky and for their retirees, and all politics aside, we've come up with a plan that takes care of every public employee. And that's the whole point of it. And that's our job.
Forgive me if this has come up, I'm sort of slow with it, but for the people who start after...
We're back, right back at you. Now we're even.
Well, you've got a lack of sleep to excuse you, but starting next July for people who begin, for the teachers and for the state workers, the retirement age would be, or the years of service would be different, I'm assuming, going forward for future people.
No, for future people, they would go into a defined contribution plan.
Right, but
And the beauty of a defined contribution plan is it doesn't require you, it doesn't mandate you to work any period of time. Again, you may have one at work. You could leave your work whenever you chose to. Do you have a DC plan? Okay, so you could leave your paper and go anywhere else, and you have complete control and portability of what you have, and you could morph it into somebody else's 401k plan or an individual IRA, an IRA that you are self-controlling. It would be the same for every employee. And here's what's interesting, too. While this was something we talked about peripherally, it wasn't the primary driver, the way millennials, among other people, which are the ones coming into the workforce now, think, Most people don't like the idea of being obligated. I've got to go somewhere and be there for 27 years. People like the idea of flexibility and portability. We have people who have taught for 10, 12, 15 years and say, you know what, I want to go start a business. We have law enforcement officers who say, listen, you know, when I was young and single, this was different. I'm now 10, 12, 15 years into this. I'm married, have a young family, and you know what? I would love to be able to go be a teacher. I'd love to be able to do something else. They don't have to feel obligated to fulfilling something that maybe their life circumstances have changed. This is going to, I'm telling you, when I'm not being facetious when I say I'd take this plan that we're going to be offering people in a heartbeat over what they've had. They will in the end have more. It is a very generous plan. It does have very good matching. You'll be able to see that. But in addition, it provides flexibility and portability driven entirely by the individual. And that's the power and the beauty of this. This will be, whether it's considered sweet or not, will be a matter of interpretation. But I'll tell you what, it will be an inducement to people to join state government if they're offered the opportunity.
You can quit whenever you feel like.
Anytime. You've got, absolutely, you can go whenever you want. And you've in every value of everything you've earned will be yours to take with you.
And that's for new hires, correct? Is there any
That is.
flexibility for anybody current?
Yeah, there will be people who will be given the option exactly at what thresholds and things is being worked out. But for all the people that are in their first years of the new plan, of the old plan, they will be given the chance to swap out. They will.
One more question.
Governor, I wanted to ask the legislators about changes in legislative duties.
I tell you what, come back at 1 o'clock. Let's do that, because literally in a moment you're going to be handed something. This is literally what you're going to see. Legislative retirement. It's got 5 bullet points. It's going to likely address exactly what you want to know. As the president said, they are going to be treated as harshly or more so than anyone else, if the word harsh is the right one, because the point is they recognize they need to lead by example, and they've done that, and I applaud them for it. You will get this. You'll get it for every one of these plans. And then at 1 o'clock, again, if you're so inclined, you have the opportunity to come back and go into this in further detail. Thank you all very much for being here. Celebrate this. This is a good day for the workers of Kentucky, both retired and active. This is a plan that will save the pension system. It will keep the pension promise, and that's exactly what we committed to do. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.